Welcome to The Explainer. When we picture towering empires or these massive architectural marvels, we usually just think of unstoppable raw power, right? But what if the ultimate counter to all that power isn't a bigger army, but actually a mother's grief? Today we're unpacking a genuinely fascinating piece of biblical scholarship. It argues that the biblical canon's whole theology of height and hubris gets completely dismantled by an entirely unexpected force: the voices of mothers.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 5 key stops. First, the hubris of height. Second, Sodom, the failed mother. Third, Zion, the grieving mother. Fourth, Mary, the humble mother. And finally, modern mothers of resistance. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with part 1, the hubris of height, pride versus vulnerability. To really get this, we have to define the core problem these texts are actually tackling. The author calls it the grammar of height and hubris. So what does it literally mean to have height in a moral or theological sense?
Well, to answer that, we've got to look at the original Hebrew. We have 2 foundational words here: gaon, which means pride, exaltation, or swelling, and gabah, meaning to be high, lofty, or elevated. Just picture the sheer architectural arrogance of the Tower of Babel. These are the exact words ancient writers used to describe that kind of unchecked, self-sufficient dominance. They're almost exclusively used for arrogant kings and towering military empires.
But here's where we get a really unexpected twist. Naturally, we associate words like nurturing, humble, or life-giving with motherhood. So what happens when these exact words of towering arrogance, gaon and gabah, are applied directly to a mother? That brings us to section 2. Sodom, the failed mother, looking at Ezekiel 16 and generational hubris. We're turning to the prophet Ezekiel to see exactly how this plays out, and it's a radical reframing of a story you might think you already know. It presents Sodom not just as a city of sexual sin, which is kind of the pop culture default, but actually as a failed, arrogant mother whose total obsession with her own height becomes her ultimate downfall. The text is actually incredibly explicit about this. It says, "This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy." Catch that word pride right there? That's our Hebrew word gaon. Her motherhood is painted as swollen, inflated, and lifted way above its proper posture of care. She passes down this generational legacy of hoarding and indifference to her daughters, completely missing the whole point of what she was supposed to be. And Ezekiel brilliantly contrasts this failed human motherhood with divine motherhood. It's striking. On one side, you have God portrayed as a nurturing mother, literally bending low into the dirt to rescue an unwashed, abandoned infant left out in an open field. But on the other side, Sodom elevates herself on a pedestal. She hoards her wealth and flat out refuses to look down at the vulnerable right at her feet. So the ultimate measure of maternal faithfulness here is ground-level hospitality. It's definitely not towering height.
Moving right along to section 3, Zion, the grieving mother, focusing on lamentations and prophetic protest. Here, the narrative shifts drastically. We move from the judgment of Sodom's failed motherhood to the visceral, just agonizing grief of daughter Zion, right in the horrific aftermath of Jerusalem's destruction by Babylon.
The text hits absolute rock bottom with this devastating visceral question: should women eat their offspring, the children they have borne? This is posed by the grieving mother, daughter Zion, directly confronting God. The mother who once hoarded abundance in her pride is now reduced to unimaginable, cannibalistic desperation as starvation just completely ravages the besieged city. It's incredibly heavy stuff. Now, the author argues this isn't just ancient sensationalism for shock value. It's a brutal, prophetic illustration of what happens when any society, even societies today, totally collapses under the weight of its own arrogant height and abandons justice. It lays bare the ultimate, catastrophic, and very human consequences of prioritizing elevated pride over just taking care of your community. But here is the thing. Daughter Zion's grief isn't just passive despair. It actually becomes an active, prophetic toolkit. First, it names the undeniable truth of the horror. It absolutely refuses to let it be silenced or sanitized. Second, it holds God covenantally accountable, loudly demanding that the divine gaze actually look at the suffering below. And third, even in total devastation, it fiercely keeps eschatological hope alive, kind of whispering that God's mercies might still be new every morning.
Which brings us to section 4, Mary, the humble mother, looking at the Magnificat and divine reversal. This is the climax of this whole reversal theme in the New Testament. We've seen the proud mother, we've seen the grieving mother, and now we meet Mary, a young, marginalized, unmarried woman living under the crushing weight of Roman imperial occupation. In her famous song, the Magnificat, Mary joyfully declares, "He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things." Think about how radical that actually is. You have a marginalized, impoverished teenager living under a brutal military occupation, and she's declaring the downfall of the empire. Not through military might and not through towering height, but through humble obedience. The absolute smallest one becomes the bearer of this massive divine reversal.
When we put this all side by side, a brilliant canonical design really starts to emerge. Think of it like a journey. It moves from Sodom's proud, hoarding, and failed motherhood in Ezekiel, right through Zion's agonizing, protesting grief and lamentations, and all the way to Mary's humble, receptive, and faithful reversal in Luke. The canon is basically insisting that God's great reversal of human arrogance doesn't bypass maternal experience. It actually emerges right from within it.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Modern Mothers of Resistance, Exploring Black Maternal Theology. You might be wondering, why does this ancient theology matter today? Well, the source material powerfully bridges this ancient canonical arc directly into the present day. It connects these ancient texts to transdiasporic contexts and the profound real-world insights of Black maternal theology.
The author draws a direct, really powerful line between the ancient lament of daughter Zion and the contemporary protest of the mothers of the movement. Both of these figures share a crucial, unshakable mandate. They absolutely refuse to sanitize violence or let the suffering of their children just get swept under the rug to make society feel more comfortable. They literally force the world to look at the pain.
The source connects this directly to figures like Mamie Till Mobley. By famously insisting on an open casket for her murdered son Emmett Till, she enacted what the author actually calls a modern Magnificat. She used her profound, shattering maternal grief as a theological tool to expose systemic injustice to the entire world, very much like Mary's song exposed the empires of her day and helped catalyze a movement for justice.
Ultimately, this explainer highlights a really profound truth about the enduring power of maternal voices. They confront societies swollen with pride. They absolutely refuse silence in the face of suffering, and they dare to imagine a world where the lowly are lifted up. From ancient scripture to modern civil rights, these mothers serve as the very first theologians of resistance, challenging the hubris of empires and fiercely protecting the vulnerable. As we wrap up this explainer, we want to leave you with the ultimate, pretty provocative question posed by this entire theological journey. We've seen how the grammar of height and hubris repeatedly falls to the power of maternal lament. So, the big question is, will today's structures of power, the modern empires of our world, finally hear and be humbled by the enduring lament of mothers? Thank you so much for learning with us today. Keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you next time.